I'm going to start with, I'm going to go from here and out. Gary Santo is the, just wave, is the CEO of agricultural supply company RX Green Technologies. He has 3 decades of experience leading high-performance teams in multiple sectors, including the cannabis industry. His experience in multi-state, vertically integrated operations helps him deliver unique insight into the ancillary supply chain side of the industry. All right, now we have Jordan. Wave. Jordan Ascanio is the creative director at Oasis Cannabis Dispensary and Production and Distribution Company City Trees, both of which are owned by Cannabis Life Sciences in Nevada. As creative director, Jordan is responsible for the marketing materials that help customers learn about which cannabis products to try and buy, and she is based in Nevada. Will Bowden? Will is founder and CEO of Grasshopper Farms, cultivation operation currently active in 3 states. He's responsible for the farm's expansion to other business lines, including outdoor cultivation. Will was recruited into the cannabis industry after retiring as a lieutenant commander for the Coast Guard, and before Grasshopper, Will spent 14 years in the pharmaceutical industry. And all the way down there, we have Brett Novy. Brett is the CEO of multi-state operator PharmaCann, one of the largest MSOs in the US. He joined the company in 2016 and became its CEO in 2019. Brett brings more than 20 years of experience in finance, operations, and business development to the cannabis industry. And before PharmaCann, Brett was the global head of financial planning and analysis for KCG Holdings. Thank you all so much for taking the time at Benzinga and educating all of us with all of your experience today. So this issue has a couple of different layers, and I want to go through them first from basically what's going to go in your grow, and then take that into consumer education. There's sort of 2 steps here, and they, as we mentioned before, they kind of interplay with each other. And there's this concept about this price and potency kind of leading the market. High THC, lower prices are really the best sellers. And Gary, I wanted to start with you elaborating on that and how that actually influences what's going on when you decide what you're putting in the ground, right? Like what does that look like?
Sure. I mean, it's clear price and potency is still selling, especially in the newer parts of the market. So anything from sort of the middle of the country to the right. I think what you're seeing, though, is a maturing of that. I mean, in the early days when we were all growing up or went to college or something, right, price and potency, you would always find the cheapest alcohol you could drink with the highest content, and that's how you got through. But that can't be where the market continues to play this many years into the space. I think people are starting to look now for the more full experience. If you go to any of the markets where you can have sort of that deli style, smell the nose of the flower, you start to find that some of the best smelling flower doesn't have the highest THC percentage. There's a whole other part of the plant out there for you. So as people start to think about that and the products you can create off of that, it does influence what you put into the ground. If you're just trying to pump out lots of yield with the highest possible THC, that is one path, you can do it. But as you start to think about cold press, as you think about solventless, as you think about any of the other products you might be bringing out, you really need to pick what you're going to grow first so it matches up nicely with what you're going to create on the other side. You can't just wonder what's going to come out, where it's going to test, and then hope for the best.
Yeah, and that actually touches really nicely on something I really wanted to talk about today, which is understanding the purpose of the flower that you're growing in the first place, right? Are you growing because you want to sell whole flower? Are you growing for extraction? There's so many ways to do that. So what does that look like practically? Brett, I want to hear from you a little bit about this. Like, what is that, when you're making those decisions, so how does that come about?
Yeah, you have to understand what the consumers want, right? And the difficult part is it takes at least a year to sort of transition a grow. By the time you vet the genetics, grow them in small batches, then grow them in larger batches, and then grow them at scale. So it feels like the cultivation facility is sort of always chasing the consumer a little bit, and that especially for us because we had a philosophy in early days, which was big yield. You want the most yields, right? Because you have this limited flowering canopy. There's a lot of fixed costs that go into growing in that space, and so the more weight you could get out of that space, the more profitable the business. But as Gary mentioned, as consumers' preferences changed, that's not just potency and price. Now it's terpenes. Now, dry cure is a very important part of high quality flower, and you could spend 12 weeks growing a great plant and ruin it in a day if you have a horrible dry cure, right? So all these things matter. And what we've done is we kind of have different post-harvest processes, different strains, and we're constantly shifting the amount of veg, mom rooms, and flower plants based on consumer preferences for, the high tier, the $65 eighth, and then the $50 ounce of shake, So it's very hard.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time. So.
I'm sure there's some, I wouldn't call it trial and error, but I'm sure there's a lot, there's a lot of active response, right? You're seeing what's selling, you're seeing what might need a little bit more help selling, you're seeing what customer demand is in the dispensary if they're coming in and asking for something. Does that have an effect at all in the decisions you make?
That is what drives the decision. But then that communication loop back to the grow is hard too, right? Because you have these grows and people that are in the grows, and then you have these stores that are dispersed throughout the state, and it's different in every state.
Yeah.
It's not like what consumers prefer in Colorado is identical to what consumers prefer in New York,
Yep.
right? So you sort of have like these micro environments that you're trying to understand in real time the feedback from the bud tenders at the stores so that we could adopt to it. But the risk is that it changes in the next 12 months, right? So you reprogram the grow for where you think, it's like skating to where the puck is going. But if you're wrong, you're hurt for a year because you misread the market, and then you have to adjust the grow again. So. And
that's exactly the issue when you're dealing with something like this, because it's state by state. The nuances, you can't it's not like a cut and paste formula. There's no such thing as cut and paste formula. If you go with that, you might miss out on larger opportunities. There might be larger mistakes made. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Are there any examples of any flower use or product category that you can think of that applies to this example you're talking about thinking 12 months ahead?
So the easiest example is sativa versus indica, right? Because for a certain period of time, like for 2 years, it was always, we need more indica, we need more indica, we need more indica. So you program the whole grow, you bring in all these new genetics, you allocate way more space to indica plants, and then all of a sudden you're hearing, no, consumers want sativas, and so you have to change it back, and it's really hard. Growing is hard. Yeah. It's very hard.
Absolutely, so. And I mean the reward is worth it, absolutely, and Will can definitely attest to that with the farms that you've been working through. Jordan, I want to talk about the indica sativa designation a little bit because customers, that's what they know a lot of times, especially if they are in newer markets. That's something that's one of the first things they probably understand about cannabis, but it's been a conversation for a very long time, and something that we work with in our own dispensaries is you gotta get past that education. You're not guaranteed to be into couch with an indica. It's never guaranteed. So how do you communicate that with customers, and how does that influence how they're shopping?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your point, customers, depending on the state, but in Nevada, they've become so known to, not knowing the process of the cultivation and how long it takes to get that flower to them. When we are educating our customers, it's different from the brand side to the retail side. On the retail side, you got to go direct to your bud tender, and hopefully the brand is providing you with the education materials that you need to help sell the product. If they're going to be paying more for flower, something that's new and fresh, they need to know the brand, they need to be trying the brand, and selling it to the customer. If that brand doesn't have those, marketing materials or those education materials, that's kind of where we step in to create that as a fresh drop, explain why this product is something that might work better for you. And I never gear it towards the indica sativa aspect. I gear it towards, this is something fresh, this is something you're gonna wanna try, and it might work for you and it might not. But if it's good quality flower, 9 times out of 10, that customer is gonna come back to pay for it, especially if you're marketing it correctly. That includes, make sure you're utilizing all of your assets, daily communications. Let's highlight the fresh drop. Let's show, that this brand is new. It's here for you. It's here to stay. Utilize your TV assets, all of your social channels, and really help that brand push that flower out there.
This segues really nicely into something I really wanted to hear from you all today about purpose-driven consumers, right? We're moving from, as Gary mentioned earlier, we're moving from this, we're starting to move away from this price potency ratio, I guess we can describe it as, and we're moving toward folks who, I just want to relax, I want to focus, just want to zone out and watch Half Baked while stoned for the 50th time. Where it's always there's different where those nuances are, especially more mature markets are coming out, and I'm seeing this in even in newer markets where folks are understanding that if I get something of a certain ratio, or I don't need to buy 32% THC flower to achieve those effects. And I think that's really important to meet that both in the grow and from the consumer perspective to make sure you're meeting those expectations. So what sort of how does that, Will, I want to ask you this, how does that affect those sort of like that customer understanding? How is that affecting what you're growing and what you're choosing to put in the ground?
Yeah, so I think that so a lot of great points up here, but I really like what Brett was talking about, and you got to understand your identity in this industry. What are you trying to accomplish? And I think that then we have to really go all in on education. So we've really got to help people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then help them to discover the options that exist for them. So it's almost like when you go into like a Tijuana shop, and the first thing they ask you when you go in there is, are you looking for relaxation, or are you looking for energy and focus? And it's the same thing with cannabis. It really is. And if we have competent bud tenders then who are able to kind of guide that discussion, and then we have to present things also to help people discover the experience as well. So Brett's 100% accurate when it comes to, especially an outdoor grow, on resetting your genetics and providing the genetics that are going to be sought after. I would say also you're going to want to make sure that you're presenting a path of discovery for folks too. Because a lot of folks out there, they're just looking for the craze of THC, and I think we're starting to get over that now with more mature markets influencing the newer markets. But as the craze of THC finds itself a steady state and we start to get a little bit more educated, I think then we got that path to discovery and exploration exists as well, right? So a balance in different strains and effects is really important there.
Yeah, I want to actually go back to something Brett said. Oh, Gary, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say the education too, I think, has to happen really with the bud tender. You can't have enough bud tender education. I can't tell you how many dispensaries I go into, you step up and they just spin the screen around, and then it's in order either by the potency, by the price, or by the newest drop, and that's the entire interaction you have, and then you're in and you're out in 10 minutes if you're lucky. I think there, if we can do more to bring the bud tenders up to speed so it becomes a consultative sell, then I think the consumer will come along with it, because they don't know. They're coming into kind of a hostile environment when you go to buy cannabis, right? You got to go through the security, you have to do it. You don't do that in anything other industry. You just walk into the supermarket, you get what you want, you get out. There you have to go through this process, and then you finally get up, it's your turn, and you're locked up. You don't know what you really want, and we're not helping them really develop what their palate could turn into.
And Jordan, I'm sure you see, thank you. I'm sure, Jordan, you see a lot of that coming in. I mean, Nevada might be a different story than other places, but just folks who are almost intimidated to figure out where they're going, what they're doing. Why do I need to show my ID twice? Why is the door locked? Like, I'm sure you see that, and that has an effect as well. Just give you 15 seconds to add something to that, and then I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you learn along the way. Oasis has been open since 2015, so there's definitely been a lot of change there. Just based on the customer experience, I feel like we finally honed in to make that experience not as strict. But like you're saying, like they go straight to the counter, they want to see the daily deals, and that's what they're looking at right away. What is the pricing? We've adjusted that to train our bud tenders on, here's this product we really want to push for this week. Talk about why this product is going to be good for the customer, and try to steer them away from just going straight for those deals.
Excellent, thank you. Will, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, I love this idea of the consumers who are coming in and they need recommendations, and there's an opportunity to seek to understand and educate. And it's so, last night we're at dinner, we're in Chicago, it's at a steakhouse, right? And one of the folks who's with me is one of the folks I work with, she's vegetarian. So she's gonna ask the waiter, like, what do you like here? He's going to start talking about all the steaks because it's a steakhouse. He did not ask her what her preference is first. And what that bud tender might like, or what somebody else might like, doesn't necessarily mean it's the experience for that person. So we really got to start talking to, and let's also remember that the consumers who come into the dispensaries right now is not our largest consumer potential population. The cannabis curious who haven't walked into a dispensary yet is our largest audience out there, and we really need to seek to understand what it is that they need to know more of, and what are they trying to accomplish. And only then can we really start to make some recommendations to help them with what it is that they're curious about, and then to have a good experience as they go down that path as well.
That analogy is amazing. It's spot on, actually. I want to circle back to Brett, something you said before about the feedback loop. And Will, I'm curious on your feedback on this because your feedback loop is different from Will's feedback loop. You're getting feedback possibly within the organization a little bit differently. Will, you might be hearing from folks outside. How is that feedback loop? Talk a little bit more about that feedback loop, because I think that's going to be key for people here to know, well, where's this feedback coming from? I can hear things or I can experience things, but bottom line is, what kind of, or as close to data as we can get from what's actually happening in the dispensary or out there in the universe, what that looks like. I'm sure it's different for both of your operations. Gary, I'm sure you've seen this as well. So I want to hear from all of you what that perspective looks like.
So there's two paths of feedback. One is just pure data. It's like, hey, we're selling a ton of this and at a good margin, so make more. But that's kind of easy. The most important feedback loop is from the bud tenders. Like, the bud tenders are so important to in the engagement with the customers, asking questions, but not just asking questions, understanding what the customers are saying back, but then sharing that with the GMs, right? And then the GMs sharing that with the regional managers, and then sharing it with the head of the commercial team, and then the commercial team talking to the head of the chief manufacturing officer, the head of cultivation, and then that feedback getting back to the analytics team, and then the analytics team reprogramming the growth. So that's what I mean. Like, there's so many parts. But we're a big company too, right? So, but there's so many opportunities for the communication to be dislocated that you really have to you have to make a concerted effort every day to make sure that all that's happening. Otherwise, you're going to miss something, So.
Great, thank you. And Will, how does that differ? How does that feedback loop, does that differ for you? Is it similar? What does it look like?
I think it's the same. So when we built Grasshopper Farms, curiosity has to stay at the top of our radar. And if we, at the individual level of every single person in the organization, are curious about what is the industry doing, what are consumers looking for, what are our retail partners looking for as well, it then beckons us to ask questions. And I think as human beings, we want to seek praise, we want to seek the good feedback. We got to get curious on the stuff that's not working too. Maybe more importantly, what's not working. So every year we've got about 17 to 19 production strains we're doing, but in one test bed outside, because we're a single season outdoor grow, we've got between 28 and 32 R&D strains we're doing also, so that we can pay attention to what's the feedback, apply it to the R&D strains, and then figure out what's going to make sense for production as well. And then lastly, I think is you got to stay plugged in with the folks who you're working with. I think a lot of times there's an opportunity for a cultivator to make a sale to a retailer. They make the sale and then they move on to the next sale. No, your job's not done, man. You got to go back there. How's the flower doing? How do your employees think about it? What are your consumers thinking about it? There is a lot of feedback that you got to go there. And if you're just going and making the sale and then moving on to the next sale, you're making yourself irrelevant. And you got to be curious. Back to that curiosity thing, yep. And not just seeking the praise and what we're doing right, but seek the stuff that people want you to do differently as well.
This is actually something a lot of our clients, specifically in New Jersey and New York, are doing. They actively solicit feedback from bud tenders, and it's a constant flow for us as marketing folks. It's a consistent flow for us that we understand. So they had that firsthand experience, can make those better recommendations, can take that information back to the farm, back to the operation, and really apply that to anything in the future. Gary, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add to that.
Sure. I think, Brett, you raise a great point, and Will, you've got to look at the full cycle of information. There's no silver bullet, and the industry's still too young, and the data's not robust enough, because in some cases, if all you do is grow indica, and then you look at your numbers, wow, indica's really selling, I'm going to grow more indica, and then you end up with a glut of a product that nobody wants anymore. One of my former shops, we used to grow this really great, 30% THC indica blend. People loved it. By the third year, they didn't want it anymore. They could have cared less. It could have been 35% THC if that's even real, but they didn't care anymore. So I think there you have to look at all the signs, because that's the difference between skating to where you think the puck's going to go and then rushing the net after the puck goes in, right? And I think that's what makes it so challenging. There is no one spot. You've got to take it all in, not get caught up with the hype, and really try to see where you can go.
I want to elaborate a little further on two things before we wrap up. First, we talked a little bit about like product and where like certain products are going, and I'm curious your take on the evolution. Brett, specifically, I want to hear like pre-roll evolution because that's that's going from you kind of take your shake and put it in there versus you're growing flower specifically for it. Infused pre-rolls are becoming a larger category. I want to hear a little bit about that and how you're tailoring your operations to accommodate for those that rising interest.
I think pre-roll is going to grow for the next 15 years. And, it's hard to innovate a pre-roll. Like you have the straight roll, which is cigarette style. You have the cone. You have different sizes. You do infuse, Now what we're going to start to experiment with is like large pack sizes. And I actually think it was Gary, and by the way, I love that comment about if 35% potency was even real. I'm not convinced it is either, but I think Gary said it, which was like, if you think about the evolution of the tobacco industry, right? Initially, people would buy pouches of tobacco, and then they'd roll their cigarettes. And then over time, it was like, hey, that's stupid. Why don't we just put 21 cigarettes in a pack and sell a pack of cigarettes? I don't even know if that's the right number, but I think it is. But and then sell a pack of cigarettes. So I see the pre-roll. I see large pack sizes of pre-roll sort of being the next evolution of pre-roll, but now we have to test it, right? And so you think about what goes into changing all of the processes, changing the pack sizes, trying to automate as much of it as you possibly can, and then putting it out to market and seeing what happens, And if we're wrong, that hurts us because we shifted away from a known product that we know we could sell at good margins that the customers liked, and because we think this is where the preference is going to go, but we could be wrong. So. And
that's exactly what I want, and then I'll call on you. That's exactly what I want folks to think about or take away from this isn't a quick turnover, right? This is a longer process. It takes time. There's risk involved, and it's proper planning, or as best as you can for proper planning. That's going to set you up for success in the next couple of seasons, you can call it. Will, go ahead.
Yeah, so Brett just said it. Like he just told you what's going to maybe happen over the next 10 to 15 years, and that's what we got to think about, right? So I think the next step for all of us in the industry is we got to recognize that we are a society, if not a worldwide society, of convenience these days. So that evolution that he's talking about right there is a very real thing. The next step then is quality and consistency, right? So if we just think about the pre-roll example alone, that pre-roll has to have a quality burn from beginning to end. Otherwise, you're going to be irrelevant. Right now, we can get away with a lot of stuff and canoeing and all these other things that people know about, but quality and consistency are the two things that are going to trump everything when it comes to the evolution of the products that are made available to people so that they can buy them in a convenient way. Remember the convenience factor, and then they're going to come back for the ones that are quality and consistent, not necessarily the cheapest option that's out there. There's some folks who are out there and they're buying the cheapest thing because it's the cheapest thing, but then they have a poor experience. They don't go back and buy that. Quality and consistency, along with that convenience, are going to be really big in this industry, sitting right on top of education. And we don't talk about terpenes enough, but like the person who had a bad experience with cannabis might have actually had a bad experience with one of the terpenes that was in that particular product that they had versus the entire cannabis experience that they thought they had a bad experience with. Things that we got to keep in mind as we go forward here.
Brian, I have one on the clock, so a few seconds. Yeah.
So what Will said is very important because the pre-roll market is changing to the good, better, best, right? You could get pre-rolls made with shake, you can get pre-rolls made with popcorn buds, and then you could get high-end pre-rolls made with premium A buds, And there's all at different price points, but they're all different quality and different experience. So that is important too, especially with the cigarette analogy, which is, hey, there's people that like the $65 eighth. Can they get the same experience from buying a $65 eighth, grinding it up and rolling it, or however they choose to consume it, with buying that same strain at a higher price point pre-roll that was made with that bud, right? And that gets down to what Will was talking about.
Excellent. Before we have a few minutes left, I want to touch on one last thing before we wrap up. There's all these, all these elements come together, right? It's what's going in the grow. We have to educate the consumer so they understand what they're buying and hopefully come back again. What are some, Jordan and Will specifically, but everybody, what are some of the more creative ways that you're trying to educate consumers on, well, this is the premium flower, this is understanding what they're buying, or whatever that looks like, understanding how a product affects? What are some interesting ways you think to go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy because I felt like at this point in the Nevada market, people were familiar with terpenes. Like we've, been talking about terpenes for forever now, but you have to remember that people are still new to the market, and so terpenes is still important. For me, I am constantly educating the customers and the bud tenders on the retail side. We're getting, turnover on bud tenders all the time, so just don't forget that they might be new, just as new as a customer starting out in cannabis. The ways that I educate them, I keep the terpenes up on our TVs all the time. I'm sending out, when I do the fresh drops on our daily communications, I will list the top 3 terpenes within those, strains. And then on the City Tree side with my brand, I love to highlight, the effects that these products are going to have for you. Especially we have our own effects line. So that has the calm, the energy, everything that you need pretty much to communicate to the consumer, this is the effect it's going to bring you, and these are the terpenes and the reasons why.
Thank you. And Will, I want to talk a little bit about, 15 seconds, farm tours, and if you think that's actually, because I know you offer those, is that something that you think can help consumers really understand quality differences or differences between outdoor and indoor grow or anything like that?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of operators in this room, and then there's a lot of people aspiring to be operators. I'd say one thing that we can all do together is get real serious about education by being transparent and providing inclusive experiences. Show people what this industry is, but also show people what this industry is not. Because the only way that we're going to get rid of the stigma is to open our doors and allow people to see what we're doing in a safe and compliant way. So that's what we do at Grasshopper Farms. People come out, take tours every day of the year if they want to, and sign up online, and we do open houses once a year. We're not unique in that way, but we're part of a smaller group that are doing that, and I would just encourage all of us to think about that differently so we can help remove the stigma, get education more to the forefront, and help people to really have a great experience with this product.
Great. Yes.
Yeah, and I think too, have an identity. I think Brett said it, right? Pick your identity. What is the hook that makes you and your operation what it is, so that every product you roll out fits that identity, so the consumer starts to equate that identity with the products you're going to give, so they don't have to get so strain specific or terpene specific. They just know that, okay, XYZ brand, this is what I usually get out of that. And I think then finding that identity is the key, because there's so little identity still out there. Even the brands that are taking hold don't have that true identity where every experience is consistent. So I think that's the other piece that kind of fits right in with what Will's saying.
Absolutely. I could talk about that forever. With our last few seconds, I just want to do a last minute kind of concluding thoughts from everybody. I'll start with Gary and go forward. What comes first, cultivators or consumers? Is that even a thing? Can you even say one of them comes first?
I think we're at the crossroads now. I think for the while, cultivators sort of led the way because it was whatever was available in the market. So especially in those limited license markets that were just ramping up. And of course the regulatory overhang that limited what the cultivator could do. And I feel like we're at that crossover point right now where the consumer is starting to catch up. And now we can start to move forward with a CPG industry that this was always meant to be.
Thank you. Jordan, 10 seconds.
In the Nevada market, honestly, I would say consumer comes first all day. To your point, I think that they need to understand the process, how long it takes to get the flower into their hands. We need to continue to educate and not be putting pricing first, but that customer feedback needs to go directly back to the cultivator and continue on.
Will, also 10 seconds.
Yeah, in the chicken and egg conversation, it's a blend of the two, I think, right? So cultivators can continue to lead the way, but we're listening and seeking to understand, incorporating the feedback, and if we do it in an inclusive way, then we can do this together and provide consumers what they're looking for.
Thank you. Brett?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I think it was like 80-20, cultivators, consumers, and now that's shifting, right? So we're somewhere on that scale, but I don't know where.
It's different everywhere. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. I appreciate it, and have a great conference.